Hello. We recently received more news about what to expect from the forthcoming game set in the world of Warhammer Fantasy, and I thought that, for my own sanity, it might be worth me taking a little bit of time to consider exactly what I want from that game. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today we're exploring some of my thoughts and fears for Warhammer the Old World. Right, this is a bit of an unusual video for me on this channel. I don't tend to do news and speculation, but given that this is such a noteworthy release and it is so tied into things that I do spend a lot of time talking about here on the channel, I still thought it would be worth delving into stuff a little bit. I guess you could consider this almost like therapy hammer. If you are a fan of the channel, you will know that Warhammer has a special place in my hobby and my heart. It was through the Warhammer world and a game of Warhammer Quest that I was first introduced to Games Workshop and miniatures wargaming at all. I've collected pretty much every single army that there is, more or less, and I'm even now currently making a brand new Warhammer army in time for the Old World's release. Hopefully. That Marienburg project, by the way, can be seen here if you want to follow me as I collect up this mercenary army and don't really paint anything just yet. But I've done some painting now. I'm going to be sharing that soon. I'm making progress. It's going okay. But that Warhammer hobby, collecting up armies in the old world and building out all of this cool story and lore, it's something that means a lot to me. In fact, Warhammer is such a guiding light for me that I've undertaken my biggest creative project in documenting each edition as it was created. And if you're following that series, do not worry, after a bit of a delay, 7th edition is on the way. I am working on it right now. It's been a tough nut to crack, but I think I've got it, and that will be shared here soon on the channel. Soon doesn't mean next week, but it means soon. That's not to say, though, that I'm some sort of slave to Warhammer Fantasy. I have collected a Tau army in 40k since they were first launched, and plenty of other 40k armies as well. I have a Tzeentch force for Age of Sigmar, and I just picked up a couple of Cities of Sigmar models, which is probably a project I shouldn't have started, but, you know, it will be fun, I'm sure, a good test bed for some new ideas that I've got. Basically, I like pretty much every game that Games Workshop have produced, and I've tried them all, more or less, over the years. I will play anything, Games Workshop and otherwise. I'm not totally slavish to any one system or world. I've got room for lots of different stuff. And the reason I say that, I give you this mountain of context, is just to make it clear that there could be lots of different ways that the old world goes that are for me and I get really excited about, or are not for me. And either way, that's actually fine. Even if I don't enjoy the old world as it comes out, there's 8 other editions of Warhammer that I could choose to play. But I am excited. I'm very excited about the old world. Everything I've seen so far fills me with this prospect of the potential of it. It looks good to me, what I've seen, and I'm really eager to get invested in it because I think it could be really good fun. Basically, I just love the idea of having a good excuse to tell new stories and fight new battles in the Warhammer world. So, regardless of whatever else I say in this video and what's in my list of hopes and fears, just know that it's okay if ultimately the game isn't for me specifically. No worries, everyone will still be fine, I will still be fine, the game will still be fine. I'm just going to share a list of things that I think would be cool to see. So, that said, the first thing I'm going to start with is a little bit of a downer, and that is the factions that we've seen so far talked about in the old world. Now, when the original list of factions was released a couple of months ago, I was pretty disappointed. I was expecting to see some of the classic races that I would consider to be very Warhammery, especially for something that's focused on the old world. Given that geographical location, sure, I wouldn't expect to see loads of lizardmen lore, say, being a key focus for the story, but I would have expected more about vampires and Skaven. They just feel really like Warhammer factions to me, an integral part of the history of the Empire, the history of the Warhammer world. So to see that they've not been included is is a bit strange, I guess. And I understand there are reasons for that. There's always going to be business factors, creative factors, lots of different reasons that may come into these decisions. And you can always write a good reason for there to be the absence of an army or the presence of an army that you might not expect. But for me personally, I would have loved to see those included a little bit more in what's going to be the sort of core of this game. Even with that, though, the fact that there's going to be these different ways of approaching the Empire, it's a period of civil war, so we're going to see lots of different Empire armies. That is really cool. I think that's a really good way to create the opportunity to tackle the Empire in new ways that we've never seen before, or even to do your favorite versions of old Warhammer armies, but give them even more character, make them more specific because they're from a very particular part of the Empire, and that means even more in this setting. Plus, it's great to see beastmen. They're always there, ever-present threat from the woods, the ever-present threat of orcs and goblins from the mountains, and a load of the other classic races as well, elves and dwarves and Bretonnians and stuff like that. So I think that that's really cool. I just think that, and I know you can play Skaven and vampires, and they will be present some to a degree. I still think I would have liked to see them more in the central story, a central sort of player in this narrative, but we'll see how that actually works out over time. I just don't want the Rat Boys to be neglected in the old world too much. Oh, and of course, there had been a lot of talk about Kislev as a potential army. They were really popular in Total War Warhammer. There's a lot of cool art for them. They would be a great thing to explore in more detail. Obviously, there have been armies for Kislev before and units for Kislev, but it feels like something very Warhammer and very old world that's just not had the level of exploration that it could have in the setting. That feels like a really good fit for this game. Hopefully they do turn up in force later on. Maybe they're holding on to them for a later release or the final sort of big push, or there'll be a second edition faction or something like that. I don't know. But I do want to see those in time, and I can be patient with that. That's fine. Also, I think Sartosan Pirates would make for a good faction if anyone's looking for even more factions to introduce. The game itself is going to be set in the run-up to the Great War against Chaos, which is a really good sort of ticking clock against which to frame all of these battles. It's a period of internecine conflict and civil strife within the Empire. You've got the Age of Three Emperors, so you've got these different factions within the Empire. That's really cool. As we say, there's all of these different reasons for everybody to be fighting. The one faction who seem like an unusual choice to me, and I understand why they are present, but it's still a little less organic, I guess, are the Tomb Kings. I think that there's probably a very good story that could be told about why the Tomb Kings have found their way or are sort of marching up into the heart of the old world, even though they don't really feel quite like they should be in that particular geographical location. Fair enough. There's going to be a reason, a story to be told, and it's that story that I hope does get told and told well, because for me, that's a big part of this kind of game. I want to be able to sort of follow that narrative and be part of that narrative. I think that that's a really cool thing to do and a way to immerse oneself even more into a game. It's not just about the mechanics for me. It's not just about the armies. The actual story and the nature of these battles that we're fighting and why the factions are there and what they're doing and how that plays into the sort of longer narrative, even if that narrative is static as it has been in Warhammer's history, it still feels like these are battles that are important within the world, and I quite like that. So I want to see how the Tomb Kings have found their way to being so central, and then what kind of story Games Workshop have in store for us in order to make this whole thing feel like weighty and like there's stakes and like there is the progression of time. I know there was probably a somewhat arbitrary reason for setting it in this particular period of history, but they've chosen really well. It's a very rich and detailed, potentially detailed part of the history of the old world, but there's loads of scope for cool stories to tell. Finding that way to fit them in will be very interesting, and that's something I'm really looking forward to. And of course, one great way to tell those stories and to bring players into those stories are through scenarios and campaigns. And in Warhammer's history, there has always been these fantastic boxed sets. So in 2nd edition, you had stuff like Terror of the Lichmaster and The Tragedy of Macbeth. In 5th edition, there were things like The Grudge of Drong and The Circle of Blood. These really cool stories with great little details and characters, and you got cardboard terrain, and there were multiple battles to fight. It's just a fun boxed set of imagination almost. It's very cool. I'm a big fan of those. I would love to see something like that come in the Old Worlds release, but I know that Games Workshop has moved more towards the campaign books as a way of telling the stories, and I still really like those actually. So in 40k and in Age of Sigmar, there have been these narrative campaigns released as a series of books that introduce new characters, that progress the story forward and move the narrative onwards, and there are battles to fight and scenarios and missions and whatever else that actually make it feel like there's this sense of progression. Now, it's a very fine balance to get that right in a way that feels narratively fulfilling without sort of doing too much and giving away too much of the story. But I think it's definitely possible, and I think it's been really fun to see Games Workshop work on that kind of thing. Whether it turns out to be boxed sets or campaign books, I just hope something like that is planned for the Old World. I would love to see a bit of a meta plot, if you like, a narrative that progresses us forward. The Great War against Chaos is right there, ready to build up to. So that would be really, really fun as a good way to explain things, to tell that story. Why are these factions here? Why are those factions not there? To make it feel immersive and to make it feel organic and quite natural. Why these battles are happening and how things are progressing and changes to the status quo. So I really hope there is something there. I'm so excited to get invested in the Warhammer story in the Old World. I just hope the sort of tools are created to help us do that. I know we can do a lot of that ourselves, and that's the stories you tell at your own gaming table, but I also love to read and partake in that kind of stuff as well, as does Martha, which is why she's come here at this particular point in the video. Okay, miniatures-wise, I know everybody will have their own list of classics that they are desperate to get in their collection. I actually shared mine recently right here, but I'm trying to temper my expectations because I don't think that everything that I would love to get hold of is going to be re-released. Things that were out of print long before the end of Warhammer Fantasy, it's pretty unlikely we're going to see those guys again. But I also hope that the new collections that are released, the stuff they do bring back into production, is a broad enough collection to be interesting for old players and new players alike, to entice them in, to want them, to get them to want to start new armies and collect up this stuff. There are so many amazing miniatures, even right at the end of Warhammer's life, that it would be fantastic to see more of those come back into production. Now, this is one of those things where I suspect it will depend how successful the initial launches are and how successful those ranges are and whether or not they get lots of new people in and lots of excitement and people wanting to buy more. And then they might start expanding what's back in production. It's a tough line to walk that, because if the stuff you want to buy just isn't there, you're not going to buy anything, potentially. So I kind of hope that they do enough in these ranges to really get people excited about every different faction that's going to be part of it. The plastics and bringing those guys back out makes perfect sense, is essential, but there's a lot of other characters and metals that I really hope we see at least made to order runs for, beyond just the essential units and the essential guys. So there's some wild and wonderful stuff that I would love to see back in production and keep my fingers very firmly crossed for. I'm hoping that things like the Engineers on mechanical steeds, Chaos Familiars, Dwarf Flame Cannons, Halfling Hotpots, High Elf Lords on dragons, and of course stuff like old school Thanquol and Bone Ripper minis all make a comeback. And is there a possibility that classic miniatures from the Warhammer Forge get reproduced as well? It seems unlikely, but I don't know for sure. But if someone from Games Workshop is watching and you could see your way to ensuring that the entire 2015 Forge World catalogue range gets put back into production, I would really appreciate it. There is a lot of hope and expectation on this game from a lot of different people. There's no way it could possibly meet every single one of those hopes for every individual. And it's entirely possible that there will be things that I wish were done differently or had been added or had been removed. But ultimately, this is not a game just for me. If I want a game that's tailored exactly to my tastes, I can take one of the existing Warhammer systems and house rule it with my friends, or I could even design my own game if I want to, or I could play this and use different rule sets, or whatever. There's lots of different ways to get the perfect game experience that I'm looking for. But I also appreciate that for many people, they want a complete package. They want a rule system that's balanced and that's worked and that feels right to them. That's perfectly acceptable. That's a totally legitimate expectation for a game. But I'm just trying to maintain a certain level of understanding that it's probably not going to meet exactly everything I want. As long as it hits enough, then that's probably okay for me. And that is because what I want the most, my biggest hope for the old world, is that it can help create another community of Warhammer fans. And through this channel and the work I've done here, I have been able to meet and speak to so many amazing hobbyists who are passionate and as big a fan of Warhammer and the Games Workshop games of the past as I am. And we indulge in and share that joy and expectation and fascination with these games by talking about them, by poring over the rule books, by sharing ideas, by showcasing our armies, by coming up with paint schemes and taking photos of them and talking about them and sharing them far and wide, getting together to play games, getting together to create scenarios and just talk about this stuff. And that is the real joy of this hobby for me. So that is what I hope we get from the old world, that there are enough people who are excited by this game, who enjoy it enough, want to collect it, want to talk about it, and want to sort of positively engage and really just get invested in it, so that we can build that new community and see that happen. And that's obviously, these things happen organically and they sort of come together in a really interesting way over time. You can't really buy that, and no company can sort of just create it en masse. There's always going to be business decisions that impact this kind of stuff. There's always going to be other external factors that impact this kind of stuff. And maybe it's naive to think that we could potentially create that new community out of this. But that's what I want the most. That's my greatest hope for this game, is that we all find a way to get invested and enjoy it enough that we can just have fun. And if the rules are fun enough, and if the story is fun enough, and if the armies are fun enough, then that's enough for me to have fun. I know that sounds ridiculous and tautological or whatever, but really, ultimately, even if this doesn't tick every single box, meet every single expectation that I have for it as a sort of rule system, as a world, as a story, I am still pretty confident that if I can get together with friends and roll some dice and play some games and enjoy it, then I will grow to love it just as much as any other version of Warhammer, with all of their faults and foibles that they've had over the years. It's because of the games I've played with it and the time I've spent talking about and thinking about it, the time I've spent reading stories in it and sort of just immersing myself in it. Those are the reasons that I've loved these games of old. And I'm hoping that I can get that in some way. Like I say, it might be naive, it might be silly, it might be totally selfish or self-indulgent, I don't know. But that's where I'm at. I'm really looking forward to the old world. I'm really excited about what happens next. Sure, I might not be a Bretonnian player or a Tomb King's player. I've got my own ideas for what I'm going to do in this game when it comes out. But I love the idea that we're going to get to do that we can all get together and play this new version of Warhammer. Well, it's a different game to Warhammer, but this new version of a game set in the Warhammer world, that is fun to me. And this sort of reminds me of those, when you'd see in White Dwarf, they'd start teasing a new release before Mordheim came out, and they're showing off, here, we're working on this, we're putting something together, it's going to be dead exciting, it's set in the Warhammer world, it's going to tell new stories. That's the kind of feel I've got at the moment, as I'm getting really excited about putting my new army on the board in this new game. It may not be exactly the same as the Warhammer of old, but I've still got the Warhammer of old, so when I want to play that, I can play it. This is just a new reason to get excited, a new reason to get together with friends, a new reason to collect and play with a new army. That is cool to me. That's that's what I'm looking forward to and where I'm at. So, yeah, I will leave it there. Hopefully, I've not rambled off in some bizarre way and that it all made sense. And you guys, I don't know, why don't you share down below in the comments what you're looking forward to the most in the old world? Does it match what I'm looking forward to the most? Try and err on the side of positivity. Let's try and create a bit of a positive discussion and community kind of conversation. What's the fun stuff that you really want to see in this new game when it comes out next year? What are you looking forward to the most? What is going to get you to the gaming table day one? Thank you very much for watching. I am Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery. Wait, there is one more thing that I would love to see brought back with the old world. Please, Games Workshop. Please.